Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're watching us from. On behalf of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center, it gives me a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, chair, participants who have registered for the event and are watching us on our YouTube channel. We're delighted to have you join us today at the International Conference on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating the New Normal. The conference is a collaborative effort of NICE and Water Policy Center that will be held for 3 consecutive days throughout 30 different sessions. We will be having 2 parallel sessions running simultaneously throughout the conference. The conference will feature 150 experts and speakers from 30 different countries who will be delivering their presentations and sharing their expertise with us. This is the inaugural session of the conference, and to chair and moderate the session, it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Pramod Jaiswal here with us today. Dr. Pramod Jaiswal is a research director at NICE. He specializes in China and South Asia and has done an extensive work on Chinese foreign policy, China's South Asia policy, and China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. He holds a PhD from School of International Studies, JNU. Dr. Jaiswal is a senior fellow at Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, New Delhi, and has also been working as a visiting faculty at different universities of Nepal and China. He has also authored and edited several books on China and South Asia. So without any further ado, let me now request Dr. Jaiswal to moderate the session and introduce the speakers for the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunena, for your kind introduction. Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gyawali, Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nepal. Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed, Honourable Minister of State for Education, Republic of Maldives. Mr. Jairam Ramesh, Member of Parliament, Rajyasabha, India. Dr. Rajan Bhattarai, Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister of Nepal. Dr. Sudha Sharma, former Health Secretary, Nepal. Dr. Lin Hong, Professor and Dean, College of International Relations, HuaQiao University, Xiamen, China. Mr. Seshadri Chari, Strategy and Foreign Policy Analyst, India. Mr. Raosaheb, Bawaskar, Director, Water Policy Center. Participants from diplomatic community, academicians, experts, friends from media, and dear participants. Namaste and good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 3-day joint webinar of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating New Normal. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. Nepal has 4 major research centers: China Studies, Neighborhood Studies, Non-Traditional Security Studies, and Defense and Security Studies. We also focus on 8 major research topics such as global governance, sustainable development in smart cities, international affairs, disaster management, defense and security, international economy and development, China's Belt and Road Initiative, refugee and migration, border and transboundary water politics, and Indo-Pacific affairs. In last 4 months, we have published 172 research articles. Most of them are in India, China, and Indo-Pacific. We organized 68 events where we invited 375 scholars to talk on issues of contemporary important issues. We have invited some of the greatest thinkers like Professor Noam Chomsky, Professor John Mearsheimer, great diplomats, academicians, and policymakers like Kishore Mahbani, C. Raja Mohan, Nirupma Rao, Admiral Jayanath Kolambege, and Dr. Ashley Tellis, Admiral Yoji Koda, and several others. Similarly, leaders like former Nepalese Prime Minister Madhav Kumar Nepal and former Deputy PM and Foreign Minister of New Zealand, Sir Donald Charles Mackinnon. We have also organized joint webinar with great institutions like Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, Center for South Asian Studies, Fudan University, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and several others. Ladies and gentlemen, this joint webinar of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating New Normal is being hosted for 3 days where more than 150 scholars from 30 countries are taking part. There are 30 sessions. Since it's an academic conference and hence we do not follow any order, hierarchy, protocol. Rather, to encourage the young scholar, we have asked them to chair few sessions and present paper with very senior scholars. There are around 35% young scholars and 40% women participation, though our aim was to have 50% in both the categories. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a known fact that COVID-19 will have huge impact globally. Surprisingly, the most developed, advanced, and economically powerful countries are most affected. In this context, in the next 3 days, we'll be having deliberation on the impact of COVID-19 on world order, health, education, economy, international relations, gender, media, and several other issues. I'd like to welcome our distinguished guests, scholars, participants at the inaugural session of the conference and thank them for their kind presence. In order to have the inaugural remark, I would like to invite Honourable Foreign Minister of Nepal, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gyawali. Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gyawali assumed office as a Minister of Foreign Affairs to Nepal in March 2018. Previously, he has served as Minister of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation. He had played a significant role during the peace process of Nepal. Honourable Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pramod. Excellencies, Member of Parliaments, eminent scholars, distinguished participants, very good morning and namaskar. It is a great pleasure to join this topical and interesting discussion on post-pandemic world order. I'd like to congratulate Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center for assembling a stellar list of scholars for the region and beyond, from the region and beyond to deliberate on the consequences of COVID-19. I am also encouraged by seeing a retinue of young scholars participating in the discussion. They are the ones who will lead and shape our future. These young people will have to live with the decisions that we take today and deal the consequences thereafter. I believe your deliberations will help to understand the challenges and opportunities ahead to us and inform policymakers. I am sure this will stimulate a constructive deliberation on a topic that everyone is keen to understand and debate about. Having said that, let me make a brief remark on COVID-19 and its consequences in terms of the old affairs. The current COVID-19 crisis has been regarded as the most serious threat the humanity as a whole has faced ever since the end of World War II. As we navigate through this crisis to the best of our abilities, this is difficult to predict what the long-term impact of the pandemic will be. We do not know how long this crisis will last, nor do we know how this pandemic will be ended. We are seeing some rays of hope on the horizon through recent news of progress in the research and developments of the vaccines. Let's hope the vaccine trials will be successful and the product will be evenly available to all the people across the world. This pandemic has put governments around the world under tremendous strain. It has disrupted the usual modus operandi of work and service delivery. It has exposed the inequalities within and among the countries and societies. It has also exposed the vulnerabilities of societies where governments are retreated from delivery of vital social services such as healthcare. On top of that, wheel of economy has been interrupted with markets and industries closed. The long-term impact on the economy due to the pandemic is yet to be ascertained. Major economies of the world have undergone contraction. As the crisis prolongs, the economic costs will be higher. Governments will need to find ways to deal with the impact long after pandemic is over. Schools have been shut. Hospitals and healthcare systems have been overloaded. Borders have been sealed. International trade has been interrupted. Unemployment has risen, and the gap between the rich and the poor has been widened. These are just a few instances of how our lives have been affected by the crisis. The progress made in the Sustainable Development Goals risk backsliding, and the crisis has disproportionate impact on the poor countries and peoples. While the pandemic has posed critical challenges ahead to us, every crisis brings opportunities with it. Pandemic has been a time of fear, but it will certainly allow us to reflect and contemplate on our priorities. It has already intensified the bond of family, taking care of the elderly, and the value of cooperation and support. At the same time, the pandemic has also exposed the vulnerabilities of humankind and fragility of globalization, the benefits of which, until recently, we took for granted, such as international travel, recreation, and global distribution of goods and services. The pandemic has forced us to look back to the basics and reflect upon the limitations of progress. Never before in the modern time, the world population as a whole must have attached importance to the human health as it is doing today. In the midst of ongoing crisis, it is still not clear how the post-pandemic world order will be like. However, broadly, we must see it through the challenges and opportunities that it may produce as we go on. We have seen in the annals of history that every large-scale crisis has been a turning point for a new beginning. COVID-19 pandemic, too, has come as an epoch-making event in our lifetime, dissecting our era in pre- and post-pandemic world. The rapid spread of disease itself has demonstrated the interdependence and interconnectedness of our world. It has been reaffirmed that today's global problems cannot be resolved in isolation. It is the international cooperation and solidarity that is required to confront this crisis effectively. We need to act together to extricate the world out of the crisis. While physical travel has been severely curtailed, we have witnessed an increased interactions amongst leaders, scholars, experts, and others through virtual platforms. This conference being one of them. We might be disconnected physically, but the digital connections have just been amplified to an extent never seen before. Now the challenge is how to translate these connections into a tangible output on the ground. I do not intend to sound an alarmist, but I do acknowledge that we live in a world of contradictions. We cannot rule out the global crisis of the magnitude will not repeat in the future. Global warming, climate change, renewed arms race, international conflicts could very much push the world into grave dangers. As with this current crisis, we will need to work together in solidarity to steer the world away from tomorrow's potential crisis. We live in a period of uncertainty. Post-war world order is in flux. While the multilateral institutions, norms, and principles that were formed after the Second World War are still in existence and functioning, the power relations that designed these institutions, norms, and principles have changed significantly. New global actors other than the states have come as well. This might induce some kind of reorder in the international systems. One thing is certain. If we have to retain the human progress made so far and advance further, we cannot retreat from what has been achieved. By nature, human beings cannot give up trade, travel, recreation, innovation, research and development, and the scientific advancement. We cannot avoid interactions between and among nations. For that to continue, we may need reforms and adjustments of international norms and institutions to cope up with new reality. We may also need some new set of institutions and norms to deal with the new normal. While doing so, it is important to ensure that the progress made so far is not reversed, that the new norms do not curtail human freedoms. impose a limit on human ingenuity, and restrain progression of societies. The new norms must be at the service of humankind, not to the other way around. The post-pandemic world order must be human-centric. We must uphold human life and dignity in all circumstances. The pandemic has already evoked self-sufficiency. It has also exposed the limitations of the market. The post-pandemic order will naturally look for the remedy of those shortcomings that will potentially increase the role of state. A critical element of post-pandemic world would probably be the capacity to innovate and distribute the vaccines. It is not merely the innovation of vaccine. What is important is the capacity to supply in global scale and in an affordable price. Capacity of scientific innovation and mass distribution would likely be an indicator of power in the new normal. We are witnessing the old values and equations gradually giving way to the new ones. There are promises and there are challenges for countries with limited capacity to trade and invention. It is likely that the rise of Asia will continue in the post-COVID era as well. The post-pandemic business order may likely be shaped by digital revolution in international and local economic transactions. Production, trading, and delivery of goods, services, and customer care, and bring renaissance in health, well-being, food habits, and search for organic contents. Economy of scale, both in production and trading, may likely benefit more. It may also bring innovation in conducting inter-state meetings and conferences and the way states negotiate. As far as Nepal is concerned, the economic imperatives and the changing global context demands our close attention and policy response to the post-COVID new normal. We consider that the prosperity and progress of the international community as a whole is in the interest of international peace and harmony. Serving our national interest in an atmosphere of peace, understanding, and cooperation is embedded in our policy of amity with all, enmity with none. With a strong faith in principles of the United Nations, Panchashila, non-alignment, and international law, we believe in multilateralism and international cooperation. Our policy of strengthening close and cooperative relations with both our neighbors, extended neighbors, major powers, development partners, and labor destination countries, and promoting regional cooperation through SAARC and BIMSTEC will continue to guide us. With these words, I would like to conclude my remarks. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your enlightening remarks. Next, I'd like to invite Honorable Minister of State for Education, Republic of Maldives, Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed. Dr. Rasheed is a distinguished educationalist with 30 years of experience in the field of education. He is a former Vice Rector of Ahmed College and is currently the head of the National Institute of Education. He is also the Global Goodwill Ambassador of International Education Advisory Council. He holds his PhD in Instructional Leadership from Asia University, Malaysia, and Masters in Education Leadership from University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. Honourable Pradeep, Kumar, Foreign Minister of Nepal, other distinguished delegates. A very good morning to you all. First of all, let me take pleasure to welcome you all for this important conference. Just now, Foreign Minister, Honourable Foreign Minister has highlighted very important points in the world during and after this pandemic. In my speech and presentation, I look at the impact of learning loss and the negative side of online learning and importance of bringing students to physical classes. Recently, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres talked about the impact of COVID-19 to education sector. In his policy brief, he talked about the impact of COVID-19. He said that education is the most important resource for the human development and the country's development. According to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the impact of COVID-19 is the most severe damage to the education sector around the world. So when Secretary General used the word, the worst hit pandemic or worst hit, a disaster to education sector ever. So we understand how severe the loss is. So because of this, Secretary General said the impact of COVID-19 is a catastrophe, which impact will be there for generations. So it's not only the current generation which is affected by the COVID-19. So the impact will be there for generations. As we know, if anything, we are unable to develop the present students, the impact will be there for future generation, because students of current generation will be the tomorrow's leaders, teachers, and policy makers. So if their potential is not developed up to the maximum potential of them, definitely they would not be fully prepared to mold the future generations. So he called upon very important points for governments and policy makers, educational leaders. He said that we have to reopen the schools with safety precautions. And the second thing, he said, governments should prioritize education in financing and focus on vulnerable children, because the impact will be sharper and severe for vulnerable children. As a last point he mentioned is future of education is here. So the future education depends on what action we made now, what decision we made now. So the future of education is with us. Let's look at the what we mean by learning loss. According to Education Policy section of UNESCO 2020, learning loss is any specific or general loss of knowledge and skills, or reversal in academic progress. See, reversal back, students are going back in academic progress, most commonly due to extended gaps or discontinuities in students' education. We can look at this learning loss in two perspectives. The first perspective is loss in terms that the teachers could not cover due to the school closure. And second and more serious loss is loss in terms of knowledge and skills that students have learned or acquired earlier, but have now forgotten due to the extended school disruption and lack of routine practice. Here, if students have forgotten the knowledge they have learned, that would be a huge loss, because over the time they have learned so many things. It has connected. That if they have forgotten the most basic functions, basic operation of any concept, the rest will be confused. Even in futures, teachers cannot teach them new concept if they have forgotten the basic operations. So these are the very severe loss. And lack of routine practice, again, this is a loss. If this routine practice is not there, students will not have interest to continue their learning. And the impact of learning loss include the decline of learning loss would be sharper for maths than other subjects, especially the impact is larger for higher grade level. But furthermore, the impact of lost instructional time and social emotional development should be anticipated. We all should think about the social development, emotional development, and physical development, how much it will be hindered due to this pandemic. The COVID-19 school closure could have many long-term consequences for today's children. A recent projection, this is World Bank's projection, Lost Wage suggests this generation could lose 10 trillion in earning over their lifetime due to the time out of the school. Because when they become employers, employees, and entrepreneurs, if their human capital is not fully developed, they will lose 10 trillion earning. 2 years before, the total GDP of the world was about 80 trillion. So this is a huge economic loss due to this impact for the current students. Recently, the World Bank's Vice President for Human Development, Annette Dixon, said, without rapid, decisive, and coordinated action, the crisis threatened to pose huge setback to hard-won gains in human capital, irreversible damaging. So this damage cannot be reversed that easily. This is lifelong opportunities of millions of children. Shortcoming in quality of schooling are leading contribution to this human capital deficit. Poor education outcomes have major cost of an individual's as well as country's future prosperity, given that human capital is the most important component wealth globally. As we know, the countries who are already developed, or the first world countries, they have transformed their economy from production-based to knowledge-based economy in early 2000. If anybody is not knowledgeable or there is deficit in their human capital, they will be in a disadvantaged position individually and collectively, because for an economy, if the main engine is the knowledge, if there is any deficit or shortcoming of the knowledge, people will be in a disadvantaged state. So we have to bring students back to school as soon as possible if the situation permits, because social loss of keeping them home is immeasurable. Even keeping children at home is negatively impact their mental health and delay their social and educational development. Recently, all the chief medical officers of United Kingdom, they call upon policymakers and school leaders to bring back students to school. They believe that there might be risk when students bring back to school, but according to them, keeping students at home for a long period of time is a higher risk. So these are the things we have to think about. A study published in April in Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics found that children in China in grade 2 to 6 experience higher rates of depression and anxiety while in lockdown. Longer duration of lockdown were associated with higher rates of anxiety and depression. So these are the impact because of the pandemic. Now, in some countries, school closure is longer. Even in the Maldives, in the capital, right now, schools are closed and we are teaching the students through online and through TV. However, the rest of the country in the island schools are opened. As we know, face-to-face classes are more important than online classes. According to CDC USA, experiencing feeling of isolation and depression and anxiety, which is common while students stuck at home. Spending greater amount of time online can also intensify feeling of loneliness, agitation, anger, and despair. The digital classrooms can be boring, stressful, or distracting for kids. Therefore, we cannot 100% depend on online learning. So physical classes are very important. All the children and teens are really missing their friends and their independence. Teens are struggling with lack of social connection more than any other group. Importance of social interaction, we have to take note because social interaction plays an important role in learning and has proven to be quite effective in peer learning and reciprocal teaching and behavior modeling. Such forms of collaborative learning and cooperative learning are more optimal way to help people to learn because we all know that how much we are happy when we are learning together, working together through discussions, through a professional argument. Apart from this, the social cognitive theory is a theoretical perspective in which learning by observing others and interacting with others are crucial. So we know the importance of face-to-face class. When students return back, we have to be ready to recover the learning loss. According to Cambridge Assessment International, schools should do the following thing. The first thing is identifying the gaps. How can we identify the learning loss and gaps? That is through diagnostic assessments or diagnostic tests to check how much different students lose what they have learned. After identifying the gaps, the next thing is address the gaps, that is remediation. We have to provide remedial programs before we continue new teaching. After remediation program, we have to measure the progress, how much students progress. In order to do this, teachers should adopt the teaching. In order to adapt teaching, Cambridge website has resources like videos, ready-made quizzes, worksheets, and detailed lesson plans. There is school supporter, but this is really for the teachers who are following Cambridge syllabus. But there are free resources which are available from the Cambridge website. So we have to ensure that return back is better. In other countries, learning loss has been experienced during summer. At the beginning of the summer, students are here. At the end of summer, students reach here. But this is not, we are not generalizing, but different students, the impact will be different. To combat COVID-19, more than 180 countries mandated temporary school closure, leaving nearly 1.6 billion children and youth out of school. So 5 months of school closure could result in loss of 0.6 years of school, just the quality. So that's all I want to share with you all. Thank you everyone for listening me and watching this presentation. And thanks for the organizers for organizing this wonderful conference. It's a pleasure to share what I feel and what I have searched from different researchers from different countries. I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed, for your remarks. Honorable Foreign Minister of Nepal, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Gyawali, has to leave for other appointments, so he'll be leaving in a while. Thank you, sir, for your time. And we'll continue the deliberation, and we'll send you all the video recordings and the report of this conference to you so that you can follow it. We have this conference for 3 days, so we'll be following you with the details. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again. May I now request Mr. Jairam Ramesh, Member of Parliament, Rajyasabha, India, for his remarks. Mr. Jairam Ramesh is a senior leader of Indian National Congress and is an Indian economist. He was a Member of Parliament, the Rajyasabha, the upper house to the Parliament of India from the state of Andhra Pradesh from 2004 to 2014. As an economist, he has entrusted with several crucial roles as an advisor of Finance Minister and also to the Prime Minister. With a special interest in China, Mr. Jairam Ramesh is an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi since 2002. Mr. Jairam Ramesh was also the member of National Advisory Council that was chaired by Sonia Gandhi. Mr. Jairam Ramesh has served in various ministries during his career. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends from across the world. We are discussing a post-pandemic world order. I would say that really we ought to be discussing the post-pandemic world disorder, because order implies systems, order implies institutions, order implies rules, order implies protocols, and order, more than anything else, implies understanding. However, in the last 6 months, the world has been turned upside down. To say that we are in a new world is to state the obvious. Old systems have broken down. Old ways of doing business have broken down. Old political relationships have broken down. Traditional institutions are fraying at their edges. And today we are confronted with a world not only characterized by risk, but also by uncertainty. We can deal with risk. We have probabilities associated with risk. But to deal with a combination of risk and uncertainty is a completely new experience for countries as well as for people. So it's not a world order, it's a world disorder. And the challenge is, how do you manage this disorder? How do you minimize the risks in this disorder? How do you make use of opportunities for revival and rehabilitation across the world? The first and most obvious area is in the area of public health. Public health systems across the world are staggering under the impact of COVID-19. In fact, the most advanced country, the United States, if you see, has been the one country in which the health system seems to have all but collapsed. Public health systems across the world, maybe with barring a few exceptions like New Zealand and Germany, public health systems across the world are under great stress and strain. And therefore, I think the one task that is of paramount importance in the months ahead, in the years ahead, is in the rebuilding of public health systems. There is absolutely no alternative to public delivery of health services. The private health system model, the insurance-led health delivery model has been completely exposed. And I think countries have now recognized the political, the social and economic significance of investment in public health. Secondly, almost all countries in the world will see economic contraction in the year 2020, 2021. Which countries will come out of this contraction, whether there will be a recovery in 22, 23 remains to be seen. But calendar year 2020 and calendar year 2021 is, I think, by and large, an era of economic depression and economic contraction. So not only are domestic economies affected, but international trade, which has been a major locomotive for prosperity for countries like India, like China, like Bangladesh, like Nepal, international trade and remittances, for example, they will be under very severe pressure. So how do countries react, respond to economic contraction? And what systems of social security they will put in place in order to protect the interests of vulnerable sections of society. Local migrants, for example, workers in the informal sector, workers in the unorganized sector. These are all questions that are assuming, that have always been important, but I think they are assuming special significance. So first, I have spoken about public health. Second, I have spoken about economic revival. Third, let me say that this COVID-19 crisis, the other dimension to this crisis is environment, is the environmental crisis. For long, the ecological balance has been disturbed by man's actions. Global warming, of course, is a manifestation of human-induced climate change. We are, as we all know and acknowledge, are in the Anthropocene. Now, there are many reasons why this COVID-19 crisis has acquired the dimensions it has acquired. But I think everybody is agreed that the root cause was the existence of wet markets. And wet markets are a reflection of the way in which we deal with nature and we deal with biodiversity. So, to my mind, the COVID-19 crisis and the environmental crisis are two sides of the same coin. And this is an opportunity for us, for all countries, to pause, to reflect, and to see how sustainable is the growth model. How sustainable is the resource intensive, land intensive, pollution intensive, deforestation intensive, chemical contamination intensive economic model that they have adopted. Because today it is abundantly clear that environment is a public health issue. Air pollution, water pollution, chemical contamination, land degradation are all extracting a public health cost in terms of morbidity as well as mortality. So I think the environmental crisis that countries are facing, that the world is facing, of which of course climate change is the most visible and the most urgent, acquires special significance in the post-pandemic world disorder. So public health, economic revival, and of course, the environmental crisis. To me, these are the three big issues that stare us. But international institutions are under great pressure. The WTO, the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, all international institutions are under great pressure. And I think the great challenge for us, the WHO is also under great pressure. So the great challenge for us is to redesign, reinvigorate international systems. When I say international systems, there could be regional institutions, there could be global institutions, there could be bilateral, there could be plurilateral, there could be multilateral institutions. But I think there is simply no getting away from the fact that we need collective action among countries. However, the prospects for this are not very bright. The United States and China are at loggerheads with each other. China and India are in confrontation with each other. China and Southeast Asia is in confrontation with each other. The United States and Europe are not on the same wavelength. So if countries, if political relationships amongst countries are fraught with uncertainty, are fraught with dangers, then I'm afraid collaboration on environment, on economic revival, and on public health systems is not going to be forthcoming. I think we have to recognize that in the post-pandemic world order, these traditional power relationships will undergo a change. And I am not pointing fingers at any one country, but I think all countries have to get together. There will be differences. There are profound differences. For long, I used to say PRC stands for not just People's Republic of China, but the peaceful rise of China. But is the rise of China truly peaceful? Is a question that many people across the world are asking. So I think the responsibility is far greater on Chinese leaders, on the Chinese system, to demonstrate to the rest of the world, not only to its neighbors, but to the rest of the world, that the rise of China is indeed peaceful, that the rise of China is indeed according to rules and protocols and institutions that are negotiated in good faith. So I think there's going to be a lot of confidence building measures that will be required by all countries, but I think it would be a special responsibility that would devolve on China by virtue of its position politically and economically. So to summarize, therefore, let me say that this is not a world order, it's a world disorder. The world is changing dramatically. Inequalities will rise. Uncertainty and risk characterize political and economic relationships and transactions. And I think the challenge for all of us is to understand what the dimensions of these change are and see how best we can minimize the risk and uncertainty. 100 years ago, we had the Spanish flu epidemic. Over 40 million people died across the world. It was a traumatic event in 1918, 1919. In the Indian subcontinent alone, about 15 million people died. But somehow, when I read back, I find the current crisis fundamentally different than the 1918, 1919 crisis. The world got out of that crisis pretty quickly. It understood the crisis and got out of it. Here, we are still trying to understand the nature, the dimensions, and the ramifications of COVID-19. Scientific understanding itself is still in an embryonic stage. So I think we have to wait and watch. The next year particularly is going to be very difficult for countries across the world. No country is immune, no country is safe, and I think it would call for extraordinary collective action within countries and between countries in regions and across countries on the global platform. So let me thank the Nepal Institute and the organizers of the interaction. The fact that we are having this interaction itself is a reflection of the world, of a different world that we are living in. Aldous Huxley wrote many years ago, "Brave New World." I'm afraid it's a new world, but it's not a brave new world. It's a very highly risky and highly uncertain new world that we are entering. We have to understand the dimensions. Old assumptions have given way. Old models of globalization may not have great relevance in the new environment. So let me once again thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity for sharing some thoughts with you at this truly extraordinary moment of human history, which we are still coming to terms with, still trying to grapple with, still trying to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, for interesting observation. May I now call upon Dr. Rajan Bhattarai. Dr. Rajan Bhattarai is the Foreign Affairs Advisor to Right Honourable Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. He is a former member of Constituent Assembly and has several high-level positions such as member of Eminent Person Group for Nepal-India Relations, Senior Vice President of Young Politician of International Conference of Asian Political Parties. He was also the chairperson of Nepal Institute for Policy Studies, a think tank working in the area of international studies, security, and democracy. He has written several books on international relations and security issues. Dr. Bhattarai, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Namaste. Good morning, everybody. Honorable ministers, honorable former ministers, Jairam ji, and distinguished panelists from various countries and the friends. Let me also thanks to the organizers for inviting me to address this very distinguished forum on very relevant topics. What I see, time has come for each one of us to see what the future is going to be like, or to start at least discussing or brainstorming that how we are going to live beyond this crisis. The crisis itself has brought us big changes in our life. Today, how we are conducting this webinar, what we call, but actually it's a seminar. This shows and this manifests the reality of the world that we are living today, the crisis that we are facing today. When we discuss about this topic, the organizer asked us to put some of our thoughts. Let me start with joining with the other, my previous speakers who have also said that we still don't know how to predict the post-pandemic world order or the post-pandemic world scenario, because the intensity of the pandemic, its impact, we still cannot, or each and every country still cannot predict very concretely in a very clear way, because the nature of this virus that we have seen in different countries experiences, even they say they've been able to control, some of the countries declare eradication, but again, it has emerged and it has been emerging. And if that is the case, then nobody can say. But one thing is certain, if the vaccine is available, so the competition of producing vaccines comes as early as possible. As we all been informed by those who are working in that area, by early next year, the vaccine is available. But still, that availability to whom, which country, and even within the country, which community are prioritized. I think the supply and the demand is very high. And in that scenario, even vaccine is produced by the end of this year, still the accessibility of the vaccine to all the human beings, those who are required to get it, it is still not very clear. In that sense, what we can say, accessibility, availability, and accessibility, if both are in the possible scenario, still we are not certain that the vaccine is ready, now we can get it. If that is the case, still we can predict, or we can say, okay, the intensity of the pandemic or the impact of the pandemic will be like this. So in that case, when we discuss post-pandemic, I think before going to post-pandemic, let me briefly say something about the pre-pandemic world, where we were living. If we go back, those scenarios where we were living, where we were heading, and what are the area the pandemic basically, impacted or negatively impacted. If we can see that, and then we can also assume or we can predict what will be the future or the post-pandemic scenario. I think the pre-pandemic, if we discuss about it, we all know that the world we were living was more globalized, it was more interdependent, there was a process of regionalism, very intensive regional country, intensively regional countries are coming together. The interdependency and the mobility of the human beings because of the technological development, accessibility of the transports, the migration, and at the same time, the education, availability of the education, healthcare. In that way, as we used to say, the world has become a virtual village. When we are facing this in all those areas, the pandemic have affected, apart from international trade and also from the international investment. So the flow of FDI, flow of international trade, how will it impact, and what are the economists And the investors, they are looking the priority areas still not been clear. But one thing is clear is that in all these areas, the pandemic have affected. It has a tremendous negative impact on each and every country. And when we see this, obviously these areas are going to be impacted. So the one scenario we can say, the countries are becoming more inward looking. Countries are becoming more isolationist, or to some extent, they are focusing on their domestic issues rather than becoming more global or regional or bilateral type of coordination and cooperation. They are becoming more on inwards because they ultimately have to address their own people first. And to address their own people first, their economy and their healthcare system. The balancing of these two areas is a great important today. Each country, each government is facing that. Either they have to focus on health. If they focus on health or controlling virus, obviously it will have a tremendous negative impact on economy. If they focus more on economy, obviously there will have a problem in controlling of that virus. So in that sense, the governments of each country is facing this pressure, and based on this scenario, the regime become more vulnerable, governments become more vulnerable, and even to some extent, the people's tolerance of their system, of their government are becoming day after day difficult to handle those. We can see in many parts of the world, people are starting to revolt. People are starting to raise their voices through different models. Even they are not allowed to participate in a big gathering, but they are expressing their views and they are expressing their dissatisfaction through the social medias and other kind of medias. So in that sense, how we are going to handle of this and how long, this all depends on the, looking or predicting about the future. Whether, there are questions which being raised. First, whether the globalization, the process of globalization will continue or not. The process of regionalism will continue or not. The process of, collaborating on certain global and regional issues will continue or not. The process of addressing the serious human, issues that has become serious challenge for the humanity and the earth, that is climate change, the crisis of environment, and then the poverty. These are the areas, these are the common interests of each and every government and each and every country. Are we going to continue in this area? In my understanding, what I see, despite all these inward-looking trends, isolationist tendency, the country ultimately has to come for the collaboration, international collaboration, regional collaboration. And in that sense, the process of globalization will continue. Maybe not as before, but the modality may change, but they need to collaborate. They need to cooperate, even bilaterally or multilaterally or in regional level or international level. And the relevancy of the international organizations and the relevancy of the regional organizations and regional initiatives will continue to be there. So in that sense, what we can say is that the process of what we have been doing, that will continue. But the flow of international trade. The flow of international investment might be not as we have seen before, as it will be in tomorrow. Because when government becomes, ultimately the governments are the decisive factor each and every country. Even when we talk about the inter-country collaboration, governments are the key actors. So when they become more inward-looking, or say they have to address their own local domestic issues and domestic populations, aspirations, then obviously the flow of international investments will may affect, that may affect. That's what I assume one thing. The second about the international trade, when country becomes more inward looking, and obviously they require to create more jobs. To create more jobs, they have to focus more on industrialization and maybe more on job making industries. So in that sense, the level of import and exports that we've been experiencing in the past couple of decades, that may go down. In that area, what we see, the kind of change we may experience in future. Same way, country like Nepal, where international migration, particularly the migrant workers, are large number. Nepal, in this region, particularly Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, these are the countries, we are the labor sending countries. And the demand of labors in this region, particularly in the Middle East and Korea, Malaysia, we don't know exactly what will be the impact. So far, we have not seen that much serious effect on this area, but still, these are the very unpredictable scenario. And so if that is going to be negatively impacted, and then obviously we will face another challenges, that is, I don't know how we are going to handle, because the goals each and every country today is to focus more on eradicating the poverty, uplifting the people's life. And they've been elected for that. And if their economy is going to be particularly impacted because of the lack of remittances and international investments, and even going to be impacted on international trade, these countries' vulnerability will grow. And that is obviously will have a negative impact in our economy and in our lives, and whatever goals we have targeted for our future, that is going to be affected. The other side, if we look on the regionalism and the balance of power in the global level, I fully agree with Honourable Jairamji when he had put some of the remarks while he was speaking, and focusing in this area. I think the rise of China and also rise of India, how is it going to impact? And the traditional power, how they are going to response on this rise of China and the rise of India. That will be the determining factors, because if they ready to cooperate, if they ready to share the power, the resources, and the expansion of their areas of influence, or they focus more on a cooperative approach, obviously the scenario will be different. But if they, in spite of coordinating and cooperating in this area and sharing the rights of the another power, if they refuse that, then obviously the confrontation part, competition, unhealthy competition will rise. And that will ultimately lead we don't know where. So if we go in the past centuries, each and every power, the dominating power, they were, they contradicted with the emerging powers, and ultimately there was war, and the new power emerged. That was the old history. And if we, there are scenario and there are views that in 21st century we don't want to go for war, and war is not the favorable thing for the human beings. In 21st century civilizations. So the peace and peaceful environment, that would be greatly benefited by each and every human being in today's world. Why don't we go for that? I think that very strong views in a global level cannot, whether it can control the future competition or say confrontation between the powers or among the countries, or the country becomes more isolationist, adamant, and the traditional want to prevail, powerful countries want to prevail in the way of their dominations, and the newly emerged countries also becomes more assertive, and then the scenario will be different, and we don't know what will be it like. So in that way, how we see the future of Asia, still we are optimistic that the shifting power from the Atlantic to the Pacific and rise of Asia will continue. And in that way, what I personally see is that the rise of China, rise of India, and their peaceful coexistence will be required, and that will be the great wish of the human beings. And at the same time, the role that has been traditionally played by US and Europe, and maybe to some extent some other, Russia and some other countries. I think what sometimes our leaders say, the earth has given us enough space to share the resources and to share and to play the role. Each one of us, they have a sufficient way of playing their own role. If that is the case and that is the scenario, I always wish for that, and I see more towards that directions, and that will be the more likely scenario, and that has to be the likely scenario. Let me conclude with thanking the organizer, especially Pramodji, for your efforts and your organizational arrangement for this seminar. And with these words, I greatly benefited from the views expressed by our honorable foreign ministers and state minister from Maldives, and Jairam ji from former minister from India, and other panelists. And I'm looking forward to listen the other distinguished panelists' views. With these words, I thank you. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattarai, for comprehensive presentation. May I now request Dr. Sudha Sharma to make her remarks. Dr. Sudha Sharma was trained as an obstetrician and gynecologist in India, UK, and Nepal. After extensive practice experience in the specialty, she moved on to a career in management and governance as the director of maternity hospital in Kathmandu and secretary at Ministry of Health and Population, Nepal. She is a fellow of the Royal College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists, UK, and she has served as a chief of health and nutrition program in UNICEF, Tanzania, for 5 years. She joined CIWEC Hospital in 2018 as the director of surgical service, primarily responsible for enhancing surgical care at the hospital. Dr. Sharma, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Namaskar and good morning, everyone. Honourable Minister, distinguished colleagues, and all the delegates who are connected to this conference online. Thank you all for having me this morning. Dr. Pramod and Nepal Institute for inviting me to this conference. By this morning, over 2.4 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including more than 827,000 deaths have been reported. WHO reports suggest that 103 countries out of those countries studied, more than half have limited or suspended service delivery platforms for outpatient services, community-based care, inpatient services due to service disruptions. So maternal, newborn, and child health and adolescent services are disrupted in at least 81 countries. It's projected that 10% decline in pregnancy-related and newborn health service could lead to as many as 168,000 additional deaths per year. Food insecurity has increased dramatically and could lead to a 25% increase in wasting, affecting 10 million children. So innovation, technology, public policy, rule of law, leadership, governance, and management have all hugely influenced people's health and greatly affected the disease outcome, either by their presence or absence. In addition, it is clear that inequities exacerbate the problems, especially with unemployment, migrant workers issues, poverty, hunger, poor roads and transport, lack of water sanitation, lifestyle-related conditions, poor management of quarantine and isolation facilities, and we've seen it all. Health infrastructure, supplies, and human resource capacity continue to present challenges even today for the quality of health services. The title of today's conference is Post-Pandemic New World Order, Navigating the New Normal. And Honourable Jairam ji also mentioned that this is perhaps a new world disorder. For me, when I was trying to think, what am I going to say in this meeting? I was trying to visualize the new world order, the new normal. And I was thinking, what does it look like? So I thought, okay, in many countries, political crisis, resurgence of nationalism, resource constraints and discrimination, unfortunately, they seem to be the new normal. The gaps between people's aspirations and government's performance is the new normal. The worst and the best of human behaviors are the new normal. Then the virus COVID-19, it has been a great equalizer. Countries, rich and poor, have all suffered. So the virus has, fortunately for me, working in the health sector, has again emphasized that health is at the core of everything we do. We have experienced this globally in multiple ways over the last 8 months or so. So looking towards the future, how do we prepare ourselves? COVID has provided us with many learning opportunities. We must use the lessons learned to prepare for the future. We must fight the stereotypes and remove complacency from our outlook and behavior. The attitudinal change is key here. The impact to the economy and its effect on multiple sectors can be devastating, as the previous speakers have highlighted. And it's perhaps the worst the world has seen over the last century. And health sector bears the brunt of this aftermath. We therefore need to plan carefully, prioritize well, and utilize our resources efficiently and effectively. In the short term, we need to continue our focus on containing the spread of infection and providing care as per the standards set by each country with the guidance of WHO. Many shortcomings have been identified in our countries in the management of COVID. The civil society, experts, and the media have continued to draw the attention of the governments. The crisis continues, and we must do our best to overcome the shortcomings. In the longer term, it looks like the virus is here to stay. We may get the vaccine by early to mid next year, but immunizing the whole target population will not be a simple feat. Issues like herd immunity, we really need to consider, do all the population need immunization? And the vaccine requirement will need to be critically analyzed. Governments must plan in advance in full collaboration with international and national partners, including the private sector. Many countries in Southeast Asia are also prone to natural disasters, as we are seeing currently in Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and all our neighboring countries also. Landslides and other forms of epidemics. Dengue is one of them. And we have the unfinished business of the Millennium Development Goals: high maternal, newborn, and child mortality, HIV, TB, and malaria. But we also have additional burden of non-communicable disease, which now seems to be really prominent because the complications of COVID has been more in people who have the non-communicable diseases. Mental health issues are again coming up to the forefront, malnutrition, among others. So women and people with disabilities and other forms of vulnerability need special attention, especially in times of epidemics and natural disasters. They are prone to disease, violence, which we have seen, unfortunately, increased work burden, and including substance abuse. It is likely that our progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals will also slow down, which makes it imperative that we prioritize our actions and focus on critical issues. Many national and international experiences have taught us that the range of services provided at the lowest level of care must be expanded, especially in terms of human resource with adequate capacity, so that people do not have to come all the way up to the big hospitals. The transports were disrupted, service quality suffered everywhere. The advantage of this will be eventually ensure that the referral hospitals can provide specialized service of high quality and focus on research and training. And how do we maintain high quality? In the health sector, those of us who have been working every day know that we critically analyze the situation, we plan, then we act, then we see the results, and then we further plan, further act. So the PDSA cycle, planning, doing, seeing, acting, planning, doing, seeing, acting, that cycle has to go on so that we do not allow for infection to happen or care not to be provided when it's most needed. So these things continue to get their need priority. Then preparedness and prompt action, we've seen, are key in prevention, containment, and management of disease, as shown by many East Asian countries and some of the other countries which the previous speakers have named. These examples show that strengthening overall health systems with enhanced surveillance capacity needs a priority. In Nepal and many South Asian countries, we have a surveillance system to detect disease like polio and few others. But that surveillance system now needs to be more robust and a bit more wider so that we are able to detect diseases even at the cross borders and within countries. So that has to be really prioritized. And what we've seen here is a severe lack of critical care physicians. We have the ICU beds and ventilators, but very few trained people to operate them. So, and the health system requires contribution from multiple types of workers. Human resource planning needs a refocus, making sure that we have all the relevant team members in place. Donors and partners must not hesitate to support the government in building a robust human resource pool. They are more interested in funding constructions and things like that. But the softer things that we need for ensuring quality, I think that needs priority right now. Healthcare financing must get a fresh look, as many countries in our region face the challenge of high out-of-pocket expenditure for healthcare, pushing people further into poverty. The social health and security programs must continue to be strengthened. Coordination and collaboration has been a challenge globally. Many countries in Europe had to centralize some aspects of pandemic response despite having a federal system of governance. As we practice the new federal system of governance in Nepal, clarification of role, responsibilities, and accountabilities must continue to receive prioritized attention. In addition, legal reforms may be necessary to meet the challenges for prompt response, such as with interprovincial transport restrictions, staff mobility, etc. In closing, I would also like to emphasize the role of partnerships. No country is immune to epidemics and natural disasters. We must therefore continue to strengthen mutual support in the spirit of collaboration based on fairness and mutual respect. Technology, research, and innovation must be used as global public goods. Among other things, it's now more clear than ever that coronavirus can spread with such speed that it can potentially overwhelm and ultimately shut down a healthcare system. But COVID or any other virus which may emerge later in future, the challenge remains the same, and we should prepare ourselves to rise up to that challenge. And there is a role for each one of us, the national and subnational governments, development partners, private sectors, academia, and professional organization, the media, our leaders, and citizens at large. Let's play our part in the fight against the pandemic, ensuring safety for all now and in the future. I wish for all success to this conference, and I would like to greet once again the hundreds of people who are connected to this conference and to the panelists, distinguished panelists who are here. Thank you all so much, and thank you Nepal Institute for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for your thoughts. The next speaker is Professor Lin Hongyu. Professor Lin Hongyu is the Dean of College of International Relations at HuaQiao University, China. He is a standing counselor of China Association for International Studies, Senior Fellow of China Pacific Studies Academy, and one of the distinguished scholar of Peking Social Science Theory Studies. Professor Lin earned his PhD degree from Peking University and was a visiting scholar at Hoover Institution at Stanford University and director of Department of International Politics at China University of International Relations. He specialized in the studies of Sino-US relations, IPE, big powers, gaming, and international security, and has published several books including Political Analysis of American Presidential Election 2017, General Studies of BRICS, Rise of China and World Governance, Rise of China and International System, Review of China National Security in 2012, Methodology of International Study in 2016. Professor Lin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First of all, thanks for the Director Bawaskar invite me to join this very important and very interesting conference hosted by the NICE and WPC. I think it's very important to more communicate, especially in this difficult time. We all know the world is knocked down by the pandemic. So I think more and more we need more opportunity to communicate with each other across the country, focus on the such topic just we discussed this morning. So I think I'm very thanks having this good opportunity to share and to learn many information and many messages from this conference. And before my remark, I think I will briefly introduce some information of my institution. And I come from the College of International Relations at HuaQiao University in China, which is the leading institution focusing on the international relationship and One Belt One Road initiative studies international securities in Southeast China. And my college located in Xiamen, is a very beautiful coastal city in China, in Fujian province. So welcome everybody to have chance to visit my college. And in 2017, my college hosted a very important international conference focused on the BRIC summit. We college hosted the international think tank focus on the BRIC summit to discuss how to improve the relationship between the developing country, especially focus on the sustainable development and international relations and international securities. And the former foreign minister of China, Mr. Li Zhaoxing, is the honorable dean of my college. So it's my great honor to join this conference this morning. And secondly, I think the topic of this conference is very meaningful. It's very important. Just as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic is the huge disaster, or it's the biggest event since the last 100 years. And although it's a peaceful event, but I think it's have more influential than the war. So I think we need more discussion to discuss the impact of this pandemic, such as this topic we will talk about post-pandemic world order and the new normal. I think the two key words of this topic is very wonderful. One is order, and the other is normal. I think it means in current situation, is out of order, or is disorder, and we need new normal to recover, to return to the normal life, to the normal international relationship. So I think this topic is very, very wonderful and meaningful. And my field, I study is focused on the major power, especially focus on the Sino-US relations. So I think I will make very briefing my opinion on the impact of pandemic on the major power relationship. I think that since the outbreak of the pandemic, the relationship between major power have very great changes. And the major power relationship face very tough challenges. We all know today the major power play a very important role in the world to keep the world sustainable, keep the world peace. And a major power have more responsibility to keep the peace of the world. But influenced by the pandemic, we know many major power relationship have faced many tough challenges. For example, I mentioned the Sino-US relations is the special example. We face very, very big challenges influenced by the pandemic. We know last year, relationship between China and US is not good before, but we only have conflict in the field of trade, of international trade, and something focused on the economic. But when the pandemic break, the US-China relationship become more tough because we come into another sensitive field, such as political, such as security issues. So I think the Sino-US relationship, current Sino-US relationship, is facing very, very big challenges. So, so many scholars describe the current Sino-US relationship as new Cold War, or another we call free fall, just like to describe the scenario of the current Sino-US relationship. I think it's very, very difficult. We need more how to say, we need more time or need more to do something to fix the foreign relationship now. Another major power relationship is the US and Russia. I think this relationship also face another challenges. We know before the 2018, the US-Russia relationships is is the traditional confrontation caused by the traditional crisis issues such as Ukraine crisis, other the traditional security issue to impose on the US-Russia relationship. But after the pandemic break, US-Russia relationship have chance to cool down on the traditional threat. But just next month, with the crisis of the Russia election crisis break, the Russia and US-Russian relationship become once again into traditional confrontations. So I think maybe this is another influential example of the influence of the pandemic on the major power relationship. And the third major power relationship, I think, is the Sino and EU relationship. Is also very important role in the to keep the world peace, especially we all know the US-China relationship is face tough challenges. We need more health relationship between China and EU. And China Foreign Minister Wang Yi just visiting the EU now, and he will want to rebuild or recover the good relationship with EU. And with this to stimulate or to help fix the US and China relationship. And the fourth one, major power relationship is the Sino-Russia relationship. I think this one is the best one between the major power relationship because Russia and China face the same threat from US. So these two countries need to come together. They need to, to solve the problem posed by the US, and especially posed by the pandemic of the, such as COVID-19 pandemic influence. So from the, in general, I think the major power relationship up to the outbreak of pandemic face a very tough challenge. They have many problems to be solved in the future, especially in the how to build a new world order or to keep the world in peace. So I think that we are in the same storm and we are in the same boat. And the major power need more cooperation. They need to reduce the conflict, need to reduce confrontation. They need to reduce the risk and need to more cooperation to, in many fields, such as the vaccine research, and how to prevent the disease spreading and many things. Because we are in the same storm, and this storm is I think is the largest storm since the last 100 years. So the major power, from the perspective of major power relationship, I think is influential by the pandemic. And that's the one I think I want to say is we just all know today the U.S. presidential election is coming to the last scenario. We just know the DNC, RNC it just finished last week, and Trump will fight for his re-election, and election politics will play very special influence on the world politics focus on especially on the how to anti the pandemic, how to solve, how to prevent the pandemic, preventing politicalizing or weaponize the issues. So we think paid more attention on how to have a good health major relationship in the future. Okay, that's my remark. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you again. I have this great opportunity to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lin. Now I'd like to request Mr. Seshadri Chari for his remarks. Mr. Chari is an Indian politician, journalist, author, and a strategic and foreign policy analyst. He's a veteran Swayamsevak of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. He currently serves on the National Executive Committee of the Bharatiya Janata Party and formerly served as head of the Foreign Affairs Cell at BJP headquarters. Seshadri Chari has also been a consultant on governance with the United Nations Development Programme, posted at Juba, South Sudan. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I take this opportunity to thank nice Nepal, my friend Pramod Jaiswal, and all of you for really coming up with such a beautiful session. The world order, post-pandemic world order is what we are all discussing. And I'm sure this is not the first seminar on this subject. There are going to be a number of other seminars also on the same subject. As we all know, the earlier speakers have also pointed out, when we talk of world order is not a structured institutional mechanism. It is actually what we can say is the say a collection or the recognition of the strength of a nation or a collection of nations, a group of nations. Now, United Nations represents the world order. So, what actually determines the strength of a nation? What actually determines the strength of, say, institutions like United Nations? The strength of a nation has not been a defined structure which has always said that this is what determines the strength of the nation. It has been changing over the past centuries. If you look at the history of 2 centuries back, it was the extent of geography that one would hold. The greater the geography that you hold, the greater is your strength. I mean, what we call the colonial past. The colonialism determined what would be the strength. So we had the colonies of the France, the French colony, the Dutch colony, the British, the French. So the colonies, they determine the world order. So the greater geography that you possess, more countries that are under your control, that determine the world order. That determine the strength of that particular country. So the British used to say that sun never sets on the British Empire. So that was the kind of world order that determined. That was the strength, or that was the parameter that determined the strength of a nation or strength of a country, and also determined the contours of the world order. During, but this particular world order, or what we call the colonial world order, collapsed sometime around 1945 to 1955. The colonies wound up. But before that, we had 2 world wars. So what determined the strength of the countries that led the world war? The parameters that set off the strength of the countries during the world war was the military strength. Whoever was very strong militarily, whoever had the maximum firepower, one who can overawe his enemy with the strength of his sword, strength of his bullets, strength of his guns, strength of the air power, and strength of the naval power. The stronger the military you have, stronger you are, and you could determine the world order. So that is how the First World War and the Second World War, through a new world order, led by countries which were militarily very strong. Then, of course, after the end of the Second World War came a period of Cold War. The Cold War, Cold War determined the new world order that emerged after the end of the Second World War, and also after the end of the colonialism, if you go back to history. And the new world order which emerged after the end of the world wars was again determined by this, by your own strength, your nuclear strength, your capability to protect yourself, and also the capability to advance your ideology, the Western ideology of free democracy, and what at that time during the Cold War was determined as the communist ideology represented by Soviet Union, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So this culminated into a new world order, and this world order came to an end. The world order determined by the military strength, the world order determined by your capacity to influence, extend your ideological influence. All this came to an end sometime around 1990s. So from 1990s onwards, we see a change in the world order. And the new world order that began after 1990, the parameters that began to determine this new world order was the economic strength. That is how we see the emergence of a new economic world order represented by the World Bank, represented by the International Monetary Fund, represented by the European Union, represented by regional economic blocs. And we in this region have the maximum number of economic blocs, in fact, maximum number of regional blocs also. So if we really strictly go by this particular historic process of world order, the world order has always been emerging. There is not a permanent structure of world order as we can call. And in this emerging world order, we are now post this pandemic. And when we say post-pandemic, I think it's too early to say post-pandemic. We are still facing the pandemic. We are not through in this. We don't know what the future is going to be. We do not know what the month of October, November, December is going to bring out. The whole of 2020 may go with the entire world fighting the coronavirus pandemic. And we do not know the 1st January 2021 what it is going to herald. But all the same, we definitely know that this particular pandemic has in fact brought us all together, as it was said in one of the Shakespeare's drama, if not love, let calamity toss her into my bosom. So if it is not cooperation, if it is not love, if it is not peace, if it is not progress, at least the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, has brought the entire world together. And now countries are increasingly looking to come out of this world order, come out of this huge problem, come out of this pandemic, and think in terms of what we can collectively do. So I think the new world order, in the new world order, one country or one nation or one region or one institution may not necessarily decide the future of the world. It is going to be a global collective leadership. What is going to be determined, the future of the world order or the future of the world countries probably would be determined by collective leadership. Now, when we talk in terms of collective leadership, even this collective leadership order, which is now at present witnessed by all of us, has been challenged. For example, United Nations. Has United Nations been really be successful? Is the United Nations really representative of all the countries in the world? Probably not. I think this order will have to change. The very structure of United Nations probably will have to change. Regional organizations also would probably become members of the United Nations, and these regional organizations and these regional groups may probably decide the contours of the future dealings between one country and the other country. So what is going to determine the contours or the template of this collective global leadership? It's going to be cooperation, not conflict. It is going to be collective growth, not lopsided growth of one country or one institution. It's going to be really a rule-based international order, not a hegemonic attitude of one country which would want to decide the future of not only the neighbors but also of the entire world. It is going to be a rule-based regional economic blocks and not an international monetary system that will lay down the conditions on which the economies of the world will be determined. So I think a new world order will have to emerge. It will emerge, and it will emerge and probably result in a structure based on eternal value systems, eternal values for an ever-changing society. Societies change, nations change, peoples change, world order changes, but what should not change is the value system on which we should be dealing with one another. The world will have to increasingly start behaving as one family. There will always be differences of opinion between the members of a family. No family can boast itself of saying that our people in our family have never had a difference of opinion. It will not. There will be a leader, but that leader will not be a hegemonic leader. The leader would probably be someone who will take everyone together and not preside over, but lead everyone from strength to strength. So we have always been talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We say the entire world is one family. So this value of looking at the entire world as one family is what is going to be determining the contours, determining the basic template of the new world order. We cannot say that I should be happy, I should be disease free. Now, which country was not disease free? If you look at the coronavirus situation, the G7 countries, the G20 countries, some of the world's most economically developed countries were the ones who have fallen victim to the maximum of disorder. So we cannot say that the new world order has to be an exclusively healthy country surrounded by unhealthy situations. So what we say, Sarvepi Santu Sukhinaha, that was the template that was laid before India. Sarvepi Santu Sukhinaha literally means let everyone be happy, let everyone be healthy. You cannot say that I should be healthy, I don't care, I don't mind what happens to people in the US, what happens to people in China, what happens to people in Nepal, what happens to people in Bangladesh, what happens to people in, say, Pakistan. No, we cannot say that. We will have to have a system where everyone is happy, everyone is healthy. And we cannot say that we are the repository of everything that the world requires. That is why we have the system, what we call, if you see the logo of Bharati Vidya Bhavan, it says, Ano Badraha Yato Rantu Vishwataha. Let noble thoughts come to us from all directions. Can we really open our windows to noble thoughts from wherever it comes? So this kind of an approach of, say, a Vishwa Dharma, let us imagine that the whole world is one family, and this kind of a world order based on eternal value system is what will have to be developed. Of course, it cannot be developed by one country, it cannot be developed by one institution, it cannot be developed by one region. It will have to be collectively developed. And this is where I think uh, the seminars like this one, which have been proposed by NICE, will really work. We are a kind of people who understand the situations. We are now facing a very serious health issues in every country. Every country is trying to develop a solution for this. But this is not going to be probably God forbid, but I'm sure this is not going to be the first pandemic. This was not the first pandemic. We have seen pandemics, we have seen issues, we have seen challenges. But every time these challenges have come, the world has been able to overcome these challenges. So this challenge also the world will overcome. How best we can collectively work, how best we can collectively work out a global leadership is what is going to matter. I think every country will have to put its shoulder to the wheel of progress, put its shoulder to the wheel of cooperation, put its shoulder to the wheel of collective growth, and come out with a solution that will be acceptable not just to the maximum number of people or maximum number of countries, but that will be good and acceptable for each and every individual residing in this world. So this kind of a situation is what we should be all looking at, and we will have to look up towards finding a common solution that will be common to all of us. I once again thank NICE for really giving us such a good opportunity to interact on some of these matters. And I hope we will be able to meet more often very soon and come out with a solution for all the problems that we are facing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chari. Here we come to the end of the inaugural session. I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers to be strictly following the time limit. Since we have a huge number of speakers at the inaugural session, we do not have questions and answers. However, we have enough discussion time at all our subsequent sessions. Now, to formally propose vote of thanks, I'd like to request Mr. Raosaheb Bawaskar, the Director of Water Policy Center, India. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramod, for hosting this inaugural session, and distinguished chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. As we come to the end of this session, I deem it great honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the NICE and the Water Policy Center to all who have graced us with your presence and contributed their parts to make this event as a resounding success. Before formally propose a vote of thanks, as suggested by Dr. Pramod in his welcome remark, let me introduce our think tank, Water Policy Center. The Water Policy Center is an independent think tank which is located in the Aurangabad district of Maharashtra in India, and it believes that the emerging water crisis across the world is a result of the lack of management rather than the shortfall of the rain, and therefore the effective management of water resources and constructive policy solutions are the need of the hour. So the Water Policy Center, it primarily focuses on the constructive policy proposals and scientific research on the water and the sustainable development. It advocates water regulations in the state and work in collaboration with the governments to ensure equitable access to the water. Now, coming to the vote of thanks, first of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Dr. Pramod Jaiswal for agreeing to chair and moderate the inaugural session today. My sincere thanks to all also go to all our esteemed speakers for being a part of this event and delivering such a comprehensive and convincing presentation. All these speakers have made very, we can say, thoughtful, insightful presentation, and the worry that they have shown in their presentation about the uncertain structure, the emerging unsustained or uncertain structure of world order or disorder, as mentioned by Mr. Jairam Ramesh. I thank Honourable Pradeep Kumar Gyawali, the Foreign Minister of Nepal, and Dr. Abdulla Rasheed Ahmed, the Minister of State for Education, the Republic of Maldives, for delivering a wonderful presentation. I thank Mr. Jairam Ramesh, the Member of Parliament, Rajyasabha, India, and Dr. Rajan Bhattarai, Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister of Nepal for their insightful presentation. My sincere thanks to Professor Lin Hong, who is the Dean College of International Relations, HuaQiao University, Xiamen, China, and to Dr. Sudha Sharma, former Health Secretary of Nepal, and Mr. Seshadri Chari, strategist and foreign policy analyst, for their thought-provoking speech. We are honored to have all the speakers with us here today, and we would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who participated in this webinar and those who are watching us live. And thank you for your valuable time, attention, and for making the session productive with your questions. Sorry for this session, this inaugural session. We could not get your questions because of the lack of time. And we are truly honored to have you all with us this morning and hope to stay connected with you in the future as well. And with the permission of the chair, Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, I declare this session ends here, and I request all of you to join us at our next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.